Go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have some other people joining us, but we will let them in as the presentation is moving forward. Good morning, everybody. I'm Clint Sockman, Executive Vice President of Advanced Green Technologies. We're excited about today's webinar to talk about solar energy, the federal incentives, grants, tax credits that are now available to municipal governments and nonprofit agencies. And then also our term contracting and cooperative purchasing agreements. I started with Advanced Roofing 18 years ago and co-founded the solar brand Advanced Green Technologies shortly after. I do qualify the company with my general contractor's license, solar license, and roofing license as well. Today we have a really seasoned lineup of speakers to talk about the topics of today's event. So looking forward to getting started. A little bit about what makes us advanced. A lot of people may know us as Advanced Roofing, especially in the South Florida market. We started Advanced Roofing in 1983 and have grown it to where we are today. Just about 700 employees, 7 offices throughout the state. We started our solar company, Advanced Green Technologies, in 2005, and Advanced Air Systems, our HVAC company, in 1994. We have a lot of government experience contracting both in the competitive bid market, the term contracting market, cooperative purchasing market, and really have a deep understanding of the challenges that are presented to government agencies as they go through procurements. And we're excited to talk about the opportunities that are in front of us today. A little bit of our learning objectives, things that we're looking to cover today. We're going to talk about solar technologies and how they're being deployed into the marketplace. We're going to talk about what's really driving the rapid adoption of the solar technologies today. We're going to learn about the federal legislation that has come into play through the Inflation Reduction Act and grant programs that are out there and how these things are funded. And then last but certainly not least, we're going to talk about the simplification of using cooperative purchasing agreements through the Equalis group. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Jeffries. Matt is a key part of our business here at AGT. He's Director of Strategic Accounts and Sales for the solar business. And he's out there solving problems for our customers every day. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clint, and good morning, everyone. As Clint said, my name is Matt Jeffries, Director of Sales and Strategic Accounts. I wanted to begin with kind of a high-level overview of just how solar works. So there's 2 very basic types of solar systems that are deployed in commercial and governmental applications throughout the country. And really, this boils down to, do they have batteries or do they not have batteries, right? So 90% of what we do is what we call a traditional grid-tied PV system. So in this scenario, you're essentially, or you simply are, producing power and then placing that power behind the meter. So you're self-consuming the power you produce before you take any power from the utility. That power is obviously produced at a lower cost than you would otherwise be purchasing it. That's a net metered scenario. Now, it's important to mention that that doesn't provide you emergency backup power because you don't have any storage, right? So when we introduce batteries to the scenario, now all of a sudden you have several new capabilities like energy offset, battery backup, right? It could take the place of a generator. You have demand side management, peak shaving, power quality improvements. And we get a lot of questions now. Battery is a hot topic. Folks say, should we include batteries? Should we not? And the answer is pretty difficult, really. The answer is it kind of depends on the situation. What I will show you is on the 2 charts on the right-hand side, the top chart shows over the last 3 years what's happened to the cost of battery storage. And then to the right side, you can see what the projected costs are slated to do in the future. And on the lower chart, that is showing battery pack energy density, or the capacity of today's current battery products. So what's happening here in short is basically the costs are falling radically and the density is increasing drastically. This is largely being driven by the automotive industry. Obviously, they're trying to make cars at a lower price point that have a further distance, travel distance. So, I mean, I guess the answer is, I always use a scenario. Buying batteries today is kind of like, when I bought my first flat screen TV, it was awesome. It was $2,000, right? It was ahead of the times. Fast forward, 10 years, you could buy, a TV twice the size with a computer in it and high definition for, $350. That's kind of the evolution that's happening in the battery storage market right now, and it's happening even faster than it happened in the tech market. Move on. So what does solar look like in commercial and governmental applications? In the top left, you'll see what probably represents 60 to 75% of our day-to-day business. This is rooftop solar. In this scenario, you're looking at a fixed tilt, 5 degree, very cost effective, can be used with or without batteries. And then, around as you move around this slide, you see other applications. So more traditional carports, those are the fastest growing segment of our business right now. On the left-hand side, kind of in the middle and the bottom there, you'll see, these can be installed on top of existing or new construction parking garages. So a lot of federal or even municipal government agencies have these garages that they're operating around the state, and that's a great application. Very high power density in that application. On the right-hand side, you'll see floating solar, really nice form factor, low cost, similar to rooftop, as well as ground mount solar just below that image. And you can see on the bottom, solar doesn't have to be, an out of sight, out of mind type of an installation. It can actually be very architecturally pleasing and integrated with other designs. Moving on. So we included this case study because it really demonstrates how cooperative purchasing can be combined with financial incentives to help government agencies expand their solar portfolios. We were hired by Broward County to install 4 megawatts of solar across 13 sites, and they elected to piggyback onto our state-issued Department of Management Services, or DMS, contract. So under the framework of this agreement, we installed, own, insure, operate, maintain, these assets, while the county's costs were limited to a one-time down payment and a fixed lease payment for the beneficial use of our on-site equipment. So this cooperative purchasing arrangement essentially allowed Broward County to install a sizable solar portfolio, 4 megawatts, with face value of almost $9 million on a budget that was $1 million. So their savings compound as they outpace utility escalation with these on-site solar systems.
Matt, just to expand on that, the 4 megawatts does also include 3 sites that are built on Miami-Dade property as well. So we have 2 energy services agreements, one with Miami-Dade County, one with Broward County. While I am interrupting your presentation, can you also talk a little bit about the revenue model that we're developing and working on with multiple municipalities, where we're turning parking lots that may be paid parking into additional revenue through covered parking?
Absolutely. Yeah, we should have included that, to be honest. But now that we're looking at these carports, it's a good segue.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. So, the model is, and, I mean, realistically, you pull into the beach. This is a perfect example. You're already pulling out your phone. You're paying $3 an hour to park in the hot sun, go to the beach, right? And what would happen if instead of $3, you paid $3.50 to park under a solar canopy? Well, what would happen is that, and a lot of times it's not even 50 cents, and one other government study that we did, it actually was 20 cents. That incremental 20 cents pays for the entire project, right? So, if that's 20 cents, right? So you add 40, 50, now you're generating incremental revenue on top of the project's break even, right? So that's a scenario very unique to any government lot or any type of a lot where you're already charging for parking, or where you could charge an incremental cost for the beneficial coverage of the solar system.
Yeah, and just to kind of further expand on that, we do see a lot of scenarios that we're analyzing when we're looking at this revenue model, where the parking revenue at an incremental cost of 50 cents or less could easily outpace the value of the electricity produced in current times. And this all depends on how much data you have about how your spots are being rented and utilized, and how many hours a day and average capacity you have. But we've seen it over and over again in more than one analysis where, we're able to take that parking data, turn it into an incremental increase, and show the revenue that you're getting now. In addition to energy savings, you're getting revenue increases, and you're also now able to take tax credits. It's really a unique case study. Sorry, Matt, the floor is yours again.
No, good point. Great point, Clint. Move on to the next slide, if you would. So I just want to dive a little bit deeper into a couple drivers that are making commercial solar projects more viable for government agencies in Florida today. The first driver, and this one tends to be overlooked, is traditional power cost escalation. So on the left-hand side of this page, you'll see the most common rate structure in Florida. This is a general services with demand, or a GSD1. And this is a published base rate sheet from a major utility. Now, if you look at the top, the time period we're looking at here is December of 21 through January of 2023. So we're talking about 13 months. Now, look at the percent increase to these base rates across the board. This is always what I refer to as a silent killer, right? Because people see their bills increasing and they naturally just assume that they're using more power. If you look at this, you might say, well, yeah, big deal. I was paying 2.22 cents and now I'm paying 2.88 cents. Who cares? It's still pennies until you look at it on a percentage basis. So what that winds up to be is, if you have a $65,000 annual power bill and you've already experienced a 30% increase, this ends up being a $20,000 operating expense headwind. And keep in mind, these are only base rates. This doesn't include the temporary fuel escalation charges or infrastructure recovery efforts that are going to be put in place this year to make up from some of the hurricane losses that the utilities experienced in 2022. So in summary, as your power costs go up, the option of producing your own power with solar on site at a lower cost becomes much more attractive, obviously. Moving on. The second major driver of solar viability, and this is particularly for governmental agencies, are incentives. So the Inflation Reduction Act passed last August, and it's having a major impact on solar investments in both the public and private sectors. Prior to August of last year, the tax credit, or the ITC, was pegged at 26%. It was scheduled to sunset over the next 2 years to 10%. With the passage of the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, we now have access to a 30% base tax credit for all solar installations. This credit can also be expanded with bonuses if the project meets certain criteria. So as an example, you get an additional 10% for domestic content, for using domestic content in your projects, another 10% if you happen to be sited in an energy community. And there's also, a 10 to 20% bonus for being in a low-income area funded by low-income financing or on Indian land. However, that low-income credit is based on an application and award program. So that's very similar to a grant. So this call is obviously focused on governmental agencies, and you're probably saying, well, that's all fine and dandy, but this doesn't apply to me because I'm a non-taxable entity, right? Well, now it does, because the IRA also includes a direct pay provision for the ITC for qualifying non-taxable entities. So you can now claim a federal rebate check even if you don't have tax liability. If you were a taxable organization, you could also take advantage of the MACR's accelerated depreciation, which is shown on the bottom left-hand side of the slide. So the image in the middle just shows, how these bonus credits can be stacked. So if a project checks all the boxes, you could get up to 70% of your project paid for with federal tax dollars. On the right, we have a few additional state incentives, and really the most relevant to governmental agencies is net metering. We talked a little bit about that on the first slide when we were talking about, a system that doesn't have batteries. On. So if you attended our webinar, I guess it was probably maybe fourth quarter last year, there were, the IRA had already passed and we already knew all of this was into law, but there was still guidance that was pending from the Treasury on how all of this works, right? And direct pay is the big one for everybody on this call, So the how it works was just released last month in a 108-page elective payment guidance. So, these projects, it's very simple now. Essentially what you're doing to simplify this is you're filing a return on a form 3468, which basically, you certify, I use domestic content, so I get the 10%, and, the base project is 30% because it meets these criteria, and you submit it, and against you have no tax liability, so it gets refunded to you in the form of a rebate check. So pretty simple process. Moving on. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Amanda Wood. Amanda is a senior federal advocacy director at Becker, and she has a distinguished background in legislative affairs in both the public and private sectors. Her strategic guidance, comprehensive knowledge of community-specific federal funding options, and direct customer engagement efforts have contributed to her track record of success. Take it away, Amanda.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to see you all. I love talking with local governments. I do this all the time because many of my clients are cities and counties and public agencies. I'm based up here in DC, and my background, as Matt said, is Capitol Hill. I was a Senate legislative director. For any of you Floridians, I worked for Senator Bob Graham for a number of years. And really what I was doing when I was working for Senator Graham is making sure the federal government was working as well as possible with constituents, getting out of your way, making sure that your projects were funded. And I've really done that exact same work since I left. So a lot of my clients are public agencies like you all, and also the companies that do business with them. Let's go to the next slide. So, gosh, I've been able to say this for about 20 years. That in a typical year, there are about 1,000 federal grant programs through 26 federal agencies, providing more than $400 billion to public agencies. And that sounds like a ton of money, and it has been. But let's go to the next slide, because there's even more now. So in the past 2 years, we've had an additional $6.9 trillion in extraordinary public spending, going from the CARES Act in April 2020, the CRRSA in December 2020, and then the American Rescue Plan Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. Just to give you guys a sense of scale, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act way back in 2009 was a single stimulus bill totaling $787 billion. So the amount of federal funding available to public agencies is really unprecedented in terms of the scope and scale, and really what the federal government wants to make investments in. They're really taking a stand about, what essential infrastructure is. Let's go to the next slide. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act really marked a change. Those first few bills were about COVID response, relief, a little bit of stimulus. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, followed by the IRA, really was that pivot to long-term investment in infrastructure, clean energy, connectivity, and job creation. Next slide. So people are always asking me what DC is thinking, and sometimes it's hard to explain. But in this case, over the past year, it's been pretty darn clear. So thinking about resilience against extreme weather, preparing for EV deployment and decarbonization, encouraging adoption of green technologies, equity, so making sure that everybody in this country has access to these extraordinary resources, really a huge investment in broadband, and then less red tape and more money, because we're going to stimulate the economy and create jobs. So more opportunities for local governments to apply directly to the federal government for funding. In some cases, cutting out the state as sort of the middleman. And really, the last couple of bills have been guided by consensus that has been reached around these things that DC is thinking now. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some of these extraordinary sort of funding streams. One of them is certainly the federal solar tax credit. Congress has passed an extension of the investment tax credit and really increased, eligibility. I think we've already covered that in some depth. So I'm going to go through this rather quickly. But in terms of criteria for the tax credit, Think about when your system was installed. So anytime between 2017 and 2034. If it's a residential deployment, you'd certainly be eligible. And that it has to be new or being used for the first time. So the credit can only be claimed on the original installation of the solar equipment. Next slide. So this is really
Amanda, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
One thing that I caught on your slide that we did not address, which is the expiration of this tax credit, which is 2033. I mean, that gives you a lot of runway for planning and execution, right? So there's no more, I guess, guessing about this tax credit and the availability. Can you get it? I mean, do you feel that that's a real stabilizer for installations and project planning?
It certainly is. I mean, so much what the federal government's doing is giving people some security about some of these opportunities being in place for the long term. Whether it's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is 5 years of funding, or the extension of some of these tax credits to way, way out in the horizon, federal government is really working hard to give you all confidence this is something you can proceed with and benefit from a federal investment perspective.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about these tax provisions, which have also been covered. But for my clients, this is really exciting. For many, many, many years, private businesses have benefited from tax incentives for all sorts of things. And the Inflation Reduction Act, for the first time, will allow these tax provisions to benefit nonprofits, state and local governments, school districts, public utility districts, state universities. So rather than using these credits to lower your tax liability, because you have none, you will be able to claim a direct payment, really, to access these funds. And it really levels the playing field. So we're right now in the 60-day Treasury comment period. They put out some proposed rules. If you're interested in digging in and providing comment on it, I'm working with a lot of local governments who are just really waving the flag for simplification and streamlining and making it as easy as possible to claim these. We're in that comment period right now, and you're able to provide input to Treasury, which is an exciting opportunity. So at the end of this summer, Treasury will be looking over all of those submissions and then publishing the final rules so that you all can begin to benefit from these opportunities this fall, I would hope. Next slide. So these are just some examples of the tax credits. They are certainly applied to solar. There are other, smart technology and sustainability tax credits as well. So I would really recommend that you try to leverage as many of these as possible. These are made for local governments, for nonprofits, so that you all can benefit from these federal incentives. Next slide. Okay. So I want to go a little further than some of these tax credits, because there are actual federal programs with cash for you all to go ahead and proactively make some of these investments. In 2009, there were some funds that were provided to rural areas for clean energy programs. This new program sort of models that. So if you're in a more rural location, there is funding for you to sort of create renewable energy projects. So solar is certainly one of the allowable uses, as well as renewable energy storage projects. So this is a program that will be funded over the next few years. The application window is open now. So if you happen to be a rural community, this is certainly something you all could access. Next slide. So again, the federal government is looking for lots of creative ways to equitably distribute these funds. One of them is the Solar for All competition. It's a $7 billion competition that's open now. States and nonprofits and municipalities can be the applicant. And this is really an effort to expand the number of low-income and disadvantaged communities that can benefit from access to solar. So really making sure that the principles of Justice 40, with 40% of benefits from any federal program flowing to disadvantaged communities, something the Biden administration cares about a great deal, that these funds can really target those communities. Next slide. Okay, so One of the things that I do a lot of is helping communities go to their members of Congress to request funding specifically for local projects. This is called earmarking. We had earmarks for many years at the federal level. There was a pause for about 10 years, and now they're back. What I have loved is to see what all the local governments are sort of choosing as their priorities to submit to their members of Congress. So this winter, cities and counties and other public agencies will again have the opportunity to apply directly to the federal government, to their member of Congress, for an earmark. It's a relatively easy process. It is a very transparent process, and we're seeing that more and more communities are submitting for projects that involve solar. So this is a great opportunity to have the federal government really paying for up to 80% of any of your projects. Next slide, please. Another extraordinary grant program that has been available, I think, for the past 4 years, but has grown hugely in terms of the amount of funding available, is the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant. This is all about funding mitigation projects to increase resilience. Solar power is certainly, a key component of something like that. I think when we think about federal funding for each of these streams, you see there's USDA funding, there's DOE funding, there's FEMA funding, and it's really going to be about figuring out the best fit for you. We can certainly help with that, and sort of building the use case and narrative around the individual grant program. So, the way that you express an application into a FEMA program might be different from a DOE program, might be different from a USDA program, but there will be $1.2 billion available for each of the next 5 years. And that's a process that I think will open a little later this month. So we'll make sure you have information on it when it becomes available. Next slide. Okay, so if you still have American Rescue Plan Act, state and local stabilization funds, you got your second tranche last year, very flexible. These funds could certainly be used for these solar projects. You have to expend them by December of 2024. If you have any questions about allowable uses, let us know. You can use some of your HUD Community Development Block Grant funds for this sort of solar deployment under the 15% set aside for public services. We talked about the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant that will open very soon. And then you all probably received an allocation through the DOE Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. Those initial, I know they were encouraging initial spending plans to be submitted by July 31st. I know not everyone has put theirs together yet. That's sort of the initial paperwork. There's still an opportunity to, distribute some of that funding for a project like this squarely and allowable use. Next slide. Okay, so I work every day with federal funds and communities. And as you are sort of exploring some of these competitive grants, perhaps, just some hints about how to apply. So federal funding is never about a shopping list. It's always about identifying a problem and presenting a logical solution. So think about your project as a story. You have this challenge. You want to make sure that that your community benefits from this sort of solar project for the benefit of the folks in your community, for the benefit of the environment. So you're really creating that narrative, and tell the reviewer really explicitly what you're going to do, who is going to benefit, and why they should care. Next slide. So, having worked with a lot of communities, some key indicators of funding success. Again, it's about improving the quality of life for your residents and improving your environment. It's about that story. Try to get a commitment from other local entities to this effort, letters of support from other community partners, both government and non-government. I think we have some really compelling data that we can use and help to support your applications. And then arm your federal elected officials to advocate for you. Your members of Congress and senators really want to advocate for funding for their communities. Give them the opportunity. If you're applying for funding, let them know, prepare draft letters of support, review the projects with them. It makes a huge difference when members of Congress contact, Secretary Granholm or Secretary Buttigieg and say, hey, this is important to my community. Lots and lots of eligible and highly competitive applications. And when it comes down to it, the ones that have that additional congressional support and oversight are the ones that are going to get noticed and funded. Let's move on to the next slide, where I'm going to pass it on to David. David, tell everyone about yourself.
I will, but Amanda, I have to tell you, as you're talking about the importance of stories, I was thinking about a situation we saw down in Louisiana with the school district, and they were trying to get some of their ESSER funds released from the state, and they wanted to put new fencing all around the school campus. And the application got rejected twice. And so finally, the third time they submitted it, they changed the application to say that they wanted X amount of dollars to put in Y amount of fencing so that they could improve ingress and egress to the school buildings while maintaining social distancing. And they got it approved in a heartbeat. So the importance of the story cannot be understated. So sorry, that triggered my head.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
That's right.
So Clint and Matt talked to you about some really amazing technology, what you can do with it, and ways to generate revenue streams. Amanda talked about just a tremendous amount of funding that's available now in a lot of different buckets and a lot of different sizes, but in effect gives you all the ability to take that really amazing technology, drive down your costs, not have to pay very much, if anything, for it as you go. My job is to talk a little bit about ways that you can actually access from AGT this technology, leverage the funding that Amanda was talking about, and actually go ahead and get your projects moving and get them moving quickly. So my name is David Akers. I'm with a national public sector cooperative called Equalis Group. I've been in the public sector cooperative world for over 20 years and worn a lot of different hats. The hat I wear today at Equalis Group, when we merged my cooperative that I had started back in 2004 with the Equalis Group about 3.5 years ago. I joined the leadership team, and my job, officially marketing and engagement, but what it really means is that once we have contract awards with companies like AGT, it is my team's job to make it really easy for all of you to access the information, the documentation, and so on that you need to know that you can, in fact, contract with a company like AGT, one of our awarded suppliers, so legally and in compliance not only with, in this case, Florida statutes, but also with uniform guidance and the other rules that apply to the federal funding that Amanda was just discussing. So that's what I do. As we move on to the next slide, you can see Equalis Group at a glance. So we've been around since I started working back 2004, 2005. Our commitment to all of you, to public agencies across the country, and certainly in Florida, we're very active in Florida right now, is we want to help you save time. We want to help you save money. And most importantly, we want to keep you legal. And when I'm put on the spot, my answer is we can never be wrong in keeping somebody legal and compliant, because that is the core trust that we bring to our members and agencies across the country. We do have nationwide coverage. We're focused on Florida today. I can tell you that we've got one of our team members is in Florida. It's pretty much every other week, working with agencies and awarded suppliers down in Florida to help those agencies meet their needs. So the next slide is going to talk a little bit. I'll just touch on where cooperative purchasing fits in public procurement. And I'm not going to go into weeds here. I just want to take a step back. And some of you probably know this already. Florida is a very cooperative friendly state. But for those of you who may not, certainly the most common way that public agencies, I don't care if we're talking about state governments, local governments, K-12s, higher ed, doesn't matter. The most common way that agencies spend their money is by going through their own procurement process in accordance with state statutes, whether that be a bid, a sealed bid, an RFP, an RFQ, an RFI, whatever it might be. That's the most common way that agencies spend their money. The steps are all spelled out in Florida state statutes, and as long as you follow the steps, you're not going to get in trouble when you get audited. There are two other avenues that are also spelled out. This is true in Florida. It's true in all 50 states. State term contracts, and then in some way, shape, or form, cooperative contracts. They could be called joint powers. They could be called intergovernmental agreements. They can be called a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, here's the key point. Here's the key takeaway. Each one of these methodologies of spending your taxpayer dollars are legal and compliant with Florida statutes. And so a lot of times what you'll see in different state laws is that state term contracts, which I know, Clint, you referenced one earlier, Clint and Matt referenced one earlier, a deal that you all had worked on down in Miami and Broward. State term contracts and cooperative contracts are a legal exemption from you having to go through your own procurement process. They're all equally valid. And that's the key point for those of you who may not be familiar with cooperatives. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about Equalis Group on the next slide. So Equalis Group is, we call ourselves a public sector cooperative purchasing organization. In a euphemistic way, what we do is we work with public agencies that go through their own standalone procurement process. They follow state statutes, they follow the requirements of uniform guidance from the federal government, and then ultimately they select winning suppliers at the end of this process and after all the bid tabulations and so on, and award contracts to those suppliers, just like AGT. It's a new contract award for us from earlier this year. And so at the end of that process, those contracts are made available to any agency that joins Equalis Group. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. So the next question that comes up on the next slide is who can use our contracts? And the way our contracts are designed, we've got a public sector audience today. So for that SLED market, state, local, and educational entities, our contracts are designed to meet or exceed in each state the statutory requirements for public sector procurement. Our contracts are also written in such a way that if federal agencies, nonprofits, or for-profits for some reason want to buy through one of our contracts and our awarded agencies want to do business through that contract, they can. But our sweet spot is all of you. It's that SLED marketplace. That's where our contracts are designed, and that's the greatest usage we have of our contracts is state, local, and educational markets. On the next slide, what's the big difference? I'm not going to go through all these bullet points. I want to highlight a couple things I think are very important. One is that our contracts are designed to be flexible. The needs of Miami-Dade are not the exact same as the needs of Daytona or a school district that's in the Tampa area. Everybody's needs are different. The suppliers may be the same, but the needs are different. So we develop our contracts in such a way that each Equalis member can get the exact solution that makes sense for them while still taking advantage of that legal exemption from having to conduct their own procurement process. We also have a team of folks. In Florida, it's Josh Harrelson. We have a team of folks who've been in the cooperative space for a long, long time, who work hand in glove with our members, with potential members, with our awarded suppliers to make sure that when it comes to procurement compliance, legal issues, and so on, that we're checking all the boxes, we're providing the right documentation, and giving the agencies the information that they need to know in order to make an informed and confident decision that they can buy what they're looking for, in this case from AGT, through the Equalis awarded contract. And as we think about where does that have value when we're talking about solar installations, the cooperative approach has value in a number of different areas. One is, in order for you to do your own procurement process, you got to get knowledgeable about solar. You got to sit there and write the scope of work, maybe hire a consultant to help you, and then go through the procurement and selection process. So there's a time factor there. Could be 6, 9, 12 months. I was working with an agency yesterday that they're still reviewing proposals they got 2 years ago. So there's a time factor. Why is a time factor important here? Because all the costs keep going up. And you got supply chain issues to deal with, interest rates that can affect the cost of projects. So that if you decide that you want to do a solar project, the sooner you can get working on that project, the better and the less expensive it's going to be. We have seen project costs across industries skyrocket over the past 2 years. And agencies that wait an extra 6 or 9 or 12 months, the economics don't look as good 6, 12, 9 months later, 6, 9, 12 months later, sometimes even a couple years later. So there's some very powerful and direct reasons why it makes sense to use a cooperative contract. The last one, we just went through this process. This was a nationwide solicitation. We had lots of respondents from all over the country. AGT won. Why did they win? Because they had one of the best proposals. So and they're in Florida. So we have an award in Florida. We have an award in a few other parts of the country as well. But they won a national competitive solicitation as being cost effective, responsible, and so on and so forth. And so what that means is we know they're a high quality supplier. And if you work with Matt, if you work with Clint and decide AGT is the best partner for you, the good news is you can start working with them tomorrow. And the risk of running your own RFP is that AGT may respond, but somebody else might lowball the offer and then change order you to death going forward. So there's a lot of reasons why a cooperative contract can be very helpful. If you go to the next slide, Tatiana, What you'll see here is a diagram of the process that our what we call lead agencies. We have a lead agency in Ohio, a lead agency in Texas. These are the entities that actually go through and do the procurement processes, do the evaluations and award contracts. And you can see that their procurement process looks very similar to yours. So in the next slide, you can see the key information about the RFP process that led to the contract award to AGT. And so you can see there was our Ohio lead agency that put out the solicitation. You can see the dates, and you can see that we have a contract with AGT that's in effect through the end of April 2027 and renewable through 2028. So the good news is this is a fresh contract, and it's available to you for enough time. It's not even as long as some of those tax credits are available, but it's available to you for enough time that you can really be thoughtful about the project that you want to put in place. And then, assuming you want to work with Clint and Matt and their team, you can start work whenever you're ready. So I said, and next slide, I said that part of our job is to make it easy for you to know that you can buy with confidence through our RFP. So all this supporting documentation that we have is available on the AGT landing page on our website. So part of our promise to you, I think the number one compliment that we get from agencies across the country is they've never worked with a cooperative that's made it so easy for them to put together their board packets and have all the documentation they need to get the approval of their legislative body, of their law directors, or legal counsel, and so on, to be able to move forward with a cooperative contract. So on the next slide, I have a couple screenshots that show you on the AGT landing page on our site. It's on the right-hand side, and where you see that red circle, that's where we have all the documentation that typically is required by either the legal folks and or procurement teams. It's all right there, readily available. You don't have to look for it. If we go to the next slide, something else we put together. For those of you who are in procurement, this what we call member kit is designed for you. For those of you maybe who are in facilities or operations, this kit is designed that you can give it to your procurement folks and say, hey, we're looking at doing some work with AGT. They have a contract here. And what this member kit does is it addresses the 4 questions that you see in the bottom right corner. And it's proven to be very effective. About 80% of the time, this kit answers the questions that come out of the procurement, finance, and legal team as it relates to the viability of using a cooperative contract. The 20% of the time when there's additional questions, that's why we have folks like Josh Harrelson on our team. You have his name, you'll have his phone number, his cell phone number, his email address. Call Josh directly, and he's there to answer those questions so that you and your organization can focus on designing the right project, the right installation, and mapping that out. So that's how we tag team with each other. On the next slide, we've talked a lot. Amanda, you talked a lot about various federal funds that are available. Clint and Matt hit on that as well. So there's lots of dollars out there. I won't belabor that point. But if you go on to the next one, the next slide, one of the questions that came out after all these different COVID relief packages were being passed by Congress and signed by whoever the president was at the time, there was a big question about whether, in fact, cooperative contracts were a viable contract vehicle for recipients of federal dollars to use when they were spending their federal money. And so what I've got cited in here is a section out of what's called uniform guidance, and it's the 3rd paragraph here, the one that's centered. And in the bold, you can see, I'm going to translate this into English, what's bolded. The non-federal entity is the city, the state, the school district, the college, university, the county, is encouraged to enter into local intergovernmental agreements. That's federal government speak for a cooperative contract. So not only are you allowed to use a cooperative contract to spend federal dollars, you are actually encouraged to do so. And we have built, if we go to the next slide, we have built tremendous resources on our website. We've built tremendous resources that are available to you where, and checking time, I'll do this quickly. We had an attorney that we were working with. He was a county prosecutor. So I don't know if you all know this, but a lot of times the attorneys won't actually talk to you, right? So the attorney talks to the county administrator who talks to us, and we had this 3-way conversation going. And this particular county prosecutor had never worked with federal funds before. So he was learning on the fly. And it wasn't a huge project. It was $700,000. It was a lighting project. And he kept asking questions, and I kept responding, and I kept asking, hey, can we just get on the phone? This will be a lot faster if we can just get on the phone. And the answer was no. So frankly, I finally got a little frustrated. And so what I did is I wrote up a document, which is a document that's in effect, it's a legal memo. And it goes through and it says, okay, follow the bouncing ball of how to know that uniform guidance not only allows, but encourages public agencies, recipients of federal funds to use cooperative contracts. We put this together sent it off about a week before Christmas a couple of years ago. And you all are probably familiar, not a lot happens around that time of year. A week after New Year's, we got word that the contract had been approved. So that's the kind of documentation we put in place because we recognize that not every one of our members is deeply familiar with federal funds and uniform guidance. And so part of our job, not to say, here's a legal opinion that's the answer, but to say, here's the statutes, here's the laws, here's the code, here's the regulations that we looked at. You look for yourself. And if you come to the same conclusion, which we think you will, then you'll have confidence that you can take those dollars that Amanda's talking about to pay for the type of project that Matt and Clint were talking about, leveraging an Equalis cooperative contract. Last thing I'll say on the next slide is that joining Equalis is easy. It takes about 3 minutes if you can type reasonably well, 2 if you're a fast typist. There's no cost, there's no dues, there's no obligations. All joining Equalis does is provide you with legal and compliant access to our entire portfolio of more than 250 contracts. And in particular, it provides you access, again, tapping into the types of federal dollars that Amanda was talking about to be able to leverage the expertise and capabilities of AGT. So, Clint, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Wow. Thanks, David. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Matt. We covered a lot of ground and certainly enlightening and exciting times. We do have a handful of questions come in from the audience, and if anything else comes up while we're having these conversations, please let us know. John had asked Amanda, can you put something in the chat box about the rulemaking? And I do see that a link to the Treasury's guidance was posted. Amanda, is there anything there worth talking over that you haven't already covered in regards to the rulemaking?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. Once we get to the end of the 60-day period and they can publish some final rules this fall, I think we'll all have even more clarity. But they've done a really good job of engaging with the public, with communities, a series of webinars. They're really eager to make this work well for you all.
Great. Larry had asked, are these contracts being referenced to CFR compliant? There was an audience response that said yes. But David, is there anything to expand on there?
Yeah, there is. So what we did is we looked at, and let me define who we is, because again, part of my job is to make sure that you are comfortable and confident in using an Equalis awarded contract. So we got 2 lead agencies. We worked with their procurement folks, their legal counsel, a number of folks on our team have been involved on the audit side and the statutory side for years. We poured through uniform guidance and we looked for every section of uniform guidance that we thought was relevant to the procurement of a cooperative contract. And then what we've done, and this is something that we can make available, Clint and Matt, to you guys, and certainly to anybody in Florida. What we did is we put together what we call a uniform guidance checklist. And so we've cited, and you can link to it, we've cited each of the different, I think there's 10 different sections of uniform guidance that we identified as being directly relevant in the opinion of that entire group of people. We translated into what I hope is relatively plain English, what that requirement is. And then in the right-hand column, what we did is we provided a description of how we contend that we met that requirement. And we've cross-referenced it to key documents relating to the AGT, well, to the original solicitation, AGT's response, and the ultimate contract award. So what we've actually done is we have provided for Equalis members a detailed cross-reference audit trail to be able to check the box on the procurement side of uniform guidance compliance.
Excellent. Thank you for that response. Rebecca from the audience had asked, do your cooperative purchase agreements include architectural and engineering services? I'll let David speak to maybe some other contracts that are outside of AGT specific contract that Equalis could offer, but I will expand that to specifically to the solar side of what we do. AGT is a vertically integrated EPC. In the solar world, that stands for engineering, procurement, and construction. In the traditional construction world, that would sound a lot like design build, but we do engineer and design our own solar system, so that portfolio of Dade or Broward sites, or really the majority of the sites that we build, are engineered internally. We follow, kind of a standard 30, 60, 90 design process where we're developing design documents, having client meetings and feedback to ultimately land at a project that we would build. And our contract is allows for that entire life cycle to happen underneath our contract. The contract is RS means based, and so everything that we do is able to be backed up with unit costs and delivered that way. David, do you have anything that you would like to add on architectural engineering services, maybe that would be non-solar related through the Equalis group?
Well, I'll speak. I appreciate that, Clint. I'll say this generally. Over time and working with a lot of our members, we have come to the conclusion that we prefer to have contracts that are all inclusive. And what we have found, based again on working with a lot of members, that generally speeds up the process. When you are working with an integrated firm, it speeds up the process. It reduces the likelihood of frequency and dollar value of change orders. And we've also learned from our members is typically, not always, but typically, our members are a lot happier with the final product, the final build, the final installation, because they're working with the same group of folks all the way through. So it's speed, it's cost, and it's satisfaction. And that's why we have a preference to find companies like AGT who are vertically integrated, who are that one-stop shop to provide that enhanced value to our members.
Excellent. Good response. Jeff, in the audience. Hi, Jeff, by the way. I haven't talked to you in a while, but good to hear from you. Has asked, how does the Equalis business model work if there's no fees? Are there fees when the agreement is used? David?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, there's no upfront fees. And frankly, I've been in this space for 20 years and I like it, because if we don't pick the types of categories of spending that are relevant to our members, if we don't have a rock solid procurement process, if we aren't picking the highest quality and most capable suppliers, no one's ever going to use our contracts. And that means that there's nothing to cover our costs. So I like the way that our model works. We get paid, and I joke, it's an egregiously small administrative fee, a point or two of the total value of a project. And it's built into the pricing. There's not additional cost that's added to the pricing. It's built into the pricing that AGT has already established, which, as Clint mentioned, is tagged off of RS means. So you know what the cost structure is. It's fully auditable. And then as those dollars come into AGT, that's when we get paid our egregiously small administrative fee, so we can continue to build our portfolio and provide services to our members in Florida and across the country.
Yeah, and I can speak to that as well as somebody who has a lot of experience with cooperative contracts and the cost of accessing them. Equalis is hyper competitive from a percentage standpoint. So a follow-up question to that was, do you have available cooperative use contracts for audio, video, AV equipment, and installation? And I'm assuming the answer is yes, but
the answer is yes, and certainly offline, happy to have that conversation. But yeah, the answer is yes.
Great. And then another follow-up question is, what is the timing of the IRA payment process to the county that procures solar work? Is it upon final completion? I think we can take that as well. It follows the same application for the standard tax credit for a business. So the solar installation does have to be placed in service. Typically, that means that it has been interconnected to the utility grid. You can also usually peg that to a permit final. So there is a gap between construction and placed in service. Obviously, that the financial impact has to be analyzed and so bridged ultimately between when you get your money from the IRA and when the installation's happening. Great questions. Nothing else is here right now. If the audience does have anything else, we are kind of right on schedule as far as time allotment is concerned. So there's a few more minutes if anybody has questions, and if not, we will go ahead and close up here. Really appreciate everybody's time. Before you leave and the exodus for the door, we would love to get a rating on our webinar. Tatiana's pulling that up right now. If you could let us know the value, if you have any recommendations for improvements, or maybe something that you would like to see in the future, we're happy to continue the educational process and bring value to our customers.
Hey, Clint, just a quick question for the attendees. What's the follow-up? I know we were recording this webinar. What are they going to be receiving from AGT going forward?
Yeah, great question. We're going to distribute a recording of this webinar along with a copy of the slide deck to all the attendees, and that can be shared amongst your associates or anybody else that you may think would have interest. Inside that slide deck, everybody here's contact information, I believe, was on the last slide. So you'll have email addresses and cell phone numbers, or not, maybe not cell phone numbers, office numbers of everybody that presented today. Matt will give you a cell phone, though. I can guarantee you that. But no, so that's what will be coming out next.
Right.
In follow up.
Well, Clint, thank you, and thank AGT for the opportunity to be here today. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad it looks like the poll results are very high. I'm glad that we're collectively able to make the time spent valuable for all the attendees.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Have a great day, everyone.
See ya.
Thanks for attending.
Bye.